All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Data and Machine Learning in 2020, Navigating a Challenging Climate. Thank you for taking time out of your day to join us. I know our presenters are extremely excited to dive right in, so I'll keep introductions relatively quick before handing it off to our moderator, Elijah, to lead the duration of today's discussion. My name is Layla. I am a marketing specialist at IT staffing and recruiting firm Motion Recruitment, and I also run the Los Angeles chapter of Tech in Motion, our international tech event series. For those joining us for the first time, Tech in Motion traditionally is an in-person tech event series where technology enthusiasts can learn from other professionals, have questions answered in real time, discover new tech, and hear stories that inspire. Given today's climate, we're excited to go virtual and bring our discussions to an even broader audience. We do have a few other webcasts coming up this week on securing as well as mobilizing a remote workforce. If you're interested in attending, I will share the links to register in our follow-up. A few quick housekeeping notes before we kick off. You'll notice that all of you have joined this webinar in listen-only mode. Feel free to submit questions and comments in the chat box on your GoToWebinar panel, and we'll do our best to address them during the Q&A session. Today's webinar will also be available on demand after the live session ends. You'll receive a link via email to view the video. And I think that's all from me. Without further ado, I'll pass it over to Elijah to get things started. Elijah is a highly engaging communicator, culture catalyst, and growth executive with over 18 years of sales, marketing, and B2B experience. Right now, he is the Director of Innovation of AppMex, where he serves as a liaison between tech teams and the business to help move client efforts to scalable ROI. Elijah, I'll let you take it from here.
Awesome. Good morning, everyone. And those of you on the replay, whatever time you're listening to us, welcome. So glad to be here. You know, the world has changed. We're going to kick this thing off a little bit differently. First of all, thanks to the panelists. I'm going to introduce them here in a little bit. Also, thanks to Tech in Motion and the crew for putting this together. This is hopefully meant to be, a rich experience for all of us. The world has changed. So we're going to start with WTF. Right? I mean, when you think about what just happened over the last 4 to 6 weeks, really all over the world, but let's specifically focus in the Americas for now. I mean, it's something that none of us saw coming, really, or have talked about it coming. And I don't mean just the pandemic. I mean the global shutdown. I don't mean just the virus, right? I mean what's happening to our economy and then our respective responses as a result of that. And so, let's see this for truly what it is. We can look through the closed walls of fear if we choose, or we can look at this as really what it is, a global reset, right? The resilience that we have as humans, right, has been the keystone reason why we have, pretty much surmounted every obstacle put in our way since millennia, since the beginning of time, right? That's why we are these evolved beings that we are, that are conscious, that are prepared. Our DNA is physically prepared to make shifts. Now, I'm not going to get too much into biohacking today. That's not this call. But I wanted just to set us up with a thought process that says, what are we going to do now, right? And how is that going to affect what we do in terms of our data, what we're going to do in terms of how we address machine learning and how we address bringing in this age of AI and robotics, right? Now, I believe we're still a little bit ways away from AI supremacy and things like that. But I want us to really start thinking about, wow, we're all at home, right? So socially isolating and distancing right now. And we have a wonderful opportunity on the other side of this thing to think about what we want to create then and reverse engineer it now. So I'd like to introduce a new word for us, or for most of us, and that word is verevity. And let me read the definition of verevity. It actually comes from the medical field, but let me read what this definition means. It means a principle of human nature that affirms a common purposefulness of human existence. Components include purposefulness, unity of purpose in humankind, activity and creativity for the common good, and then the value and meaning of life. And see, I know that you didn't come here to hear that today, but I want to tell you that the old dog eat dog linear corporate American thing, guys, that's got to die. And it's got to die to a more open source, a more collaborative. I mean, we are crowdfunding pretty much all types of initiatives, whether we're doing it inside our corporations or we're doing it outside. We have an opportunity to look at our personal lives, right? The shell that we are housed in and our beings. We have an opportunity to look at that and say, what do I want to, how do I want to be different in this reset on the other side? Same thing for us leaders who are on this call today. How do we want our corporations and our teams to be different stepping into this new economy that we're all shoved in right now, okay? So instead, if we see this as an opportunity, we can choose to reflect inward, perhaps adopt or re-identify or, commit to new values and ideas. So I'm a class millennial / Gen X, or actually Harvard Business Review called us Exennials. Exennials are the people that were born after the Gen Xers and before the millennials in about 5-6 year window. I was very excited to see that I was an Exennial, a new category there. But let me tell you kind of why I'm bringing that up, because we all played a thing called Nintendo. And I mean the original Nintendo that you had to blow in the cartridge. Yep, I went there. Yep. Or put little alcohol swabs on the inside so you could play that game. And some of you are chuckling right now because you remember Nintendo. But guess what? I remember playing games on Nintendo and getting so frustrated with this 8-bit, right, game console that would freeze on you or do weird things. And you get so mad, you just press that reset button. Right? And that's kind of what's happening to us today. We've just pressed this reset button. So new players, new leaders will emerge. Billion-dollar companies that don't even exist yet will emerge. So we have an opportunity to double down on our health, double down on our individual and corporate missions, and we need to be perceptive, right, to where the change is needed and how to proceed through that change. So we're going to change the conversation from WTF to, all right, how are we going to respond now, personally and professionally? And our response should be pointed at a bigger, broader, technological think tank perspective, because obviously we're here today for data and machine learning in the midst of this changing climate. So what I like to do is just say one thing before we jump into reading bios is your breath is your life. Oftentimes when we're in stressful situations, we hold our breath in, we get anxious, and that creates a stress response inside our bodies that elevate our cortisol levels and put us into fight or flight mode. So I want to remind everyone today, even the panelists on the call and all of us listening today, to take deeper, meaningful, purposeful breaths. There's been many peer-reviewed clinical studies on this. Guys like Wim Hof, who many of us have heard of, from yoga and Qigong. Stig Severinsen, who has a PhD in breathwork, who holds the Guinness Book of World Records, 22 minutes of holding his breath. Yes, he did not die. Also, 3 feet in the Arctic Circle, he held his breath for 3 minutes or so, 250 feet under 3 feet of ice. Okay, so the world of what we can do in terms of our capabilities as humans is astronomical. But I'm just asking us to start with our breath, to take a breath, to take a moment. If you haven't taken a moment during this time in your reset, to take some deep breaths and let in some newness, some new ideas, new opportunities, okay? Awesome. All right, so let me jump in and read some of the bios here for us today, and we will jump in right now. So I'm gonna first off introduce you to Dr. Elizabeth Owen. She is a data science consultant at Google and founder and chief data scientist of Learning Data Discovery. Her work focuses on optimizing data-driven design and immersive learning systems through integrated machine learning. Most recently, she headed the analytics platform for adaptive game-based learning as director and learning data science at Age of Learning. And so thank you, Elizabeth, for being on the call. We call you Liz. You said that was okay. So Liz, thanks for being on the call here today. Next up, I'd like to introduce Alexis Rue. He's the senior manager of data science at Twitter. Alexis is the senior manager of data science, where he is managing a team of data scientists and engineers working on information integrity. He has been innovating in software for over 20 years, building systems ranging from smart email, chatbot, customer services, and more. For the last 7 years, he's been focusing on AI using data science, graph, machine learning, and deep learning. Next, I'd like to introduce you to Curtis Bennett. Curtis is a solutions architect at Vertica with over 20 years of experience in data analytics, software engineering, data modeling, data warehousing, and ETL development at Sprint, Capital One, Walmart, CenturyLink, and more. Awesome. Well, hey, panelists, thanks for being on the call. I think you're all unmuted, but if you're not, please unmute yourself. We are going to jump right in. How's everybody doing? Panelists, how are we doing?
Great. Doing great. Excited.
Excellent.
Awesome. Thanks for being on this call today. And I know everyone's excited to hear from you and your expertise. So let me jump us in with this first question. And this question, any of you could answer this question. So we're going to just kick it off looking at the current climate, what's changing our journey, and kind of looking at ROI even downstream. So how do you guys see the current climate fundamentally changing business and the approach to data and machine learning? And whoever wants to jump in there. Alexis, why don't you take that one?
Sure, Elijah. And first of all, good morning, everyone, and glad to be there, virtually. So I think nowadays, with the event and the COVID, as you said, businesses have to reshuffle priorities and adapt to new realities. For a company like Twitter, for instance, it means that we have to handle a significant seasonal usage. It also means we have to accelerate initiatives around health, such as information integrity, due to the spread of COVID-19 misinformation. We have to operate with reduced human review capability, and as such, have to accelerate some of the work we were doing around heuristics and machine learning. So it definitely has an impact. I think every company is impacted differently and has to adapt and has to face new realities. And some of them are very nimble. If you look at some of the examples for companies like Airbnb, for which the entire business is altered, they're coming up with new services like online experience. So I think every company has to adapt, and for some of the smaller companies, it means focusing on probability a lot sooner and really changing plans.
Awesome, thanks for that. Hey, Liz, what do you think about that question? The current climate fundamentally changing business and approach. Yeah.
I do think it's fundamentally changing, and from my perspective as a data and behavioral science expert in online systems and immersive digital environments, I think we're going to see a lot more distance usage. So part of my work with Google is on Stadia, and I think in terms of both entertainment, learning, and business, we're going to see a lot more use of distance technology to facilitate, communication with others, acceleration of business goals, and acceleration of learning. And this whole environment really also highlights, again, how connected we really are. I mean, when we walk into a workplace, if we ever do that again, let's just remember what that was like. You take for granted the people sitting around you. It's sort of like, okay, there are people here, I got to do my thing. But sitting here, in your own office at home or your own space, it really accentuates the fact that we are all interconnected, and we need to be fostering ways to work together and connecting. And so technology and data that supports distance integration and communication is going to be really key here. I also think that personalization of these environments, of the digital environments that allow us to connect and learn, are also going to be key. I think we're going to see a new wave of products that will allow us to connect effectively, and also have personalization around the way we use these tools. And data science has a lot to do in terms of supporting that initiative in the future.
That's good. I'm glad you mentioned that. When we think about opportunities and what could be potential on the backside of this COVID-19 pandemic, I think about what type of coherent data-driven problems should we all be looking for, right? Where should we look in our own respective environments, companies, and ourselves, right? Especially if we're a data scientist or we're a leader for an organization, or maybe we're looking just to get into machine learning because we know, hey, our specific role is changing as a result of this, and now we're pivoting into machine learning. But my question is, where should we look to find the answers and to start making those predictions within data science and within the data? Liz, you want to take that one again?
Again, I think we need to be doubling down on connection and ways to connect. From a behavioral science perspective, people are going to need to keep growing professionally. to prepare themselves for future jobs that aren't even here yet as a result of this change in climate. And so I think one thing that analytics really can help us to do is to develop effective tools for communication and distance learning, while leveraging our humanity, while leveraging ideas of others and connecting, and in terms of education or learning or professional development, leveraging the expertise of other people effectively and supporting the growth of individuals and the whole business. And so doubling down on that and finding ways for adaptive, personalized use of digital environments and connectivity software is going to be really, really helpful. That's part of my background, and that's sort of my bias in terms of looking at this behaviorally, is how do we use data science to build better tools and to make them more effective and personalized, not just for ourselves, but we have a whole generation of children growing up that are going to need different tools. In a way, this is their 9/11 in a sense, that this is the thing that happened during their childhood that they'll remember forever. Like, wow, that changed everything. And the way we adjust to that in terms of tech experts and data experts is going to really define their future and their learning. So it's not just for our current business climate, it's for the future as well.
And it's certainly going to accelerate remote work, right? All the companies will have done that for months at a time, and even education, right? My kids are all doing online, education, right? Online schooling. Yeah, I think it's a big change.
Yeah.
I'll share a quick use case that many of us may have not even thought of. But there's someone that I know that had to go to court, and obviously courts are closed, but it was something that was pending. It was already on the books. Well, guess what? The judge was at his house. The attorneys were at their homes. The defendant and respondent were at their homes. And guess what the court did? They sent them a Zoom link. You went to court at home. Now, hallelujah for that. If you ever need to go to court, not that I do, but if you ever need to go to court, man, the process of looking at this is, man, that might be something. Think about the tax dollars that would be saved just from that infrastructure alone, right? And that's just one use case of someone that I know that had to go to court. I think it was a traffic ticket or something like that. He was fighting, but the whole process was online. We should have had that years ago. We've had the technology, but now this opportunity might allow us to step into that. So Liz, I appreciate you saying that. Let's dive in a little bit more to the technical aspect here. So I'm going to ask this to Curtis. Curtis, if someone is looking to leverage their data, right, by standing up, solid ML data processes and practices, what does that journey look like at a high level from your seat?
Well, first, I just want to say I think there was a lawyer that actually got in trouble for showing up to court in a bathing suit recently. I just read an article about he threw a Hawaiian shirt on top of his bathing suit and at the poolside, right?
Wow.
So, I think in terms of data, we're obviously big advocates of data. I work for a data-centric company, and whoever has the most data is going to win, right? And that's never been more apparent. So, when you look at all the challenges that are endemic in data science and analytics, nothing has changed, right? I mean, clearly there's more data to be had. There's more data. I'm amazed at how many websites have sprung up around coronavirus and how you can track it, and I look at one every day. I watched a news story about a 17-year-old kid that built a website around tracking coronavirus, and he was getting offers of somebody offered him $8 million to put ads on his site, and he refused them, which was crazy, which I thought was pretty stupid on his part, actually. But yeah, so I mean, the data, and we're data hungry, obviously. So, in terms of that, it's always been true, and I think it will continue to be true. It's just the data is out there. We just have to find it and get it, and it's going to make everything a lot better if we've got good data behind what we're trying to solve.
Can I add to that just briefly? I think part of this crisis or the unique situation in which we're living now has highlighted the need for transparency and quality of data. Literally, people's lives depend on the availability of data from tests for COVID-19, for antibody tests from COVID-19. The social distancing measures depend on the availability and transparency of data about where the virus is spreading and where it's not. And so, you know, to Curtis's point, I think the assimilation of different sources of data together into one highly visible space that everyone can use is a classic problem of data science. And it's one that we are now confronted with and we need to take very seriously because literally lives are at stake.
Yeah, and thanks for that, Liz. But to that point, I mean, when you look deeper into the algorithm layer, you know, how can we ensure that, you know, algorithm use is driving towards real and actionable insights and results, right? How can, how can complex ML be made more visible to key stakeholders, right? Because they want to know, what am I getting for what I'm spending? So we all know, pretty much everyone on this call knows we should be using our data. We know that AI is coming. We know MLDL is here. But what do I do? Where do I start? So how would you answer that?
Me?
Anybody want to take that? Oh, Liz, go for it.
Oh, no, I'm just asking.
Oh, okay. Anybody want to take that?
What was your question again, Eli?
So yeah, so the question is, you know, how do we ensure, you know we need data, we know we need to use our data, right? But how do we ensure that the algorithm use of that data is driving towards actionable insights, right? So essentially, we're not doing ML to set up cool science projects that have no ROI, have no impact on the business, right?
Right.
So how can those complex ML results be made visible to those key stakeholders?
Well, you're right. I've always said that if you do data science and you don't actually get that into production, you don't actually monetize it or find benefit from it in some way, you're not doing data science, you're just doing science experiments, right? So I think there have been challenges in that space, you know, with traditional data science approaches, getting, you know, it's easy for a college graduate or a master's level, you know, data science, person to do a lot of this sort of science experimentation and things, but there have been challenges with traditional approaches getting that stuff into production and monetizing it, and you know, and I think the tools will get better. I mean, we're obviously, I work for a database company, we're big advocates of doing all of that in the database, which is a bit of a paradigm shift from the way a lot of, you know, traditional practitioners do that, which solves a lot of those problems. So I think the tools will improve, and I think the processes will improve, and it's going to get better over time. Right now, it's still, I think, in the infancy in some ways.
And the key, sorry, go ahead, Elizabeth.
Go ahead.
I was going to say the key there is measurement, right? You want to measure your model when you develop and use, you know, metrics like, you know, ROC and F1 and so forth. But you want to do that also at production time. You want to make sure that you have a way of measuring, you know, the way, you know, machine learning algorithm is working, whether it's implicit, explicit feedback, random measurements. You have to do that because the data change, the user change. So even a model that's good at initially, you know, could degrade. And of course, before you even put model in production, you have a way of measuring and doing A/B testing and so forth.
That's good.
Yeah.
Hey, we're gonna step into that even more here in just a second in the data environment section, guys. I want to ask one more climate-related question and challenges and opportunity, and then we'll jump more into the data environment itself. So this last question here is, you know, when and I'm going to ask this to Alexis. You've been silent for a bit, so you know, when and where should I build my own data practice or ML team, and when and where should I buy or use, you know, maybe an external service-based model? How would you make a recommendation there?
Sure, a great question. I think this is the eternal build versus buy, right? I think you can look at it through the lenses of like cost and risk. But I think if you look at machine learning and AI, the additional twist is like how sensitive and strategic your data is. Should you trust, you know, external vendor, cloud vendors, which may become competitors? And also, could you develop something more accurate by doing customization based on the uniqueness of your data and problem? That would make sense from a business standpoint. If not, then you should probably, you know, use, you know, what's out there.
Got it. Great feedback for that first section there. We're going to step into the data environment more specifically because I know we're chomping at the bit there. So, you know, this question I'm going to point to Alexis again and also Liz. Why is it important to create a culture of data, from processing, integrity, usage, and scale, things like that? Why is that
You want to
important?
go first?
Sure. Sure. If we're talking about a culture of data or data science, I think we need to get at what do we mean by data science? Like, I think, you know, sometimes we talk about data science and it's this big umbrella term. What does it really mean? And I think the answers to the previous question get at the very important point that there's a whole way of systems thinking about data that is critical. So how do we get at ROI? We look at what is your driving insight? What is your research question or driving insight? That should drive everything. And in the vein of agile development and Scrum practices, what is your user story for that information? Who is going to be consuming this information and why? A classic case is, again, the coronavirus. Who needed this information and why? And that particular user story wasn't focused on until the virus had spread quite a bit. And that cost a lot. As sort of in parallel to how it would cost a business money, this has cost people lives, and which is much more serious and much more important. So it just highlights the big picture. You're not just being a data scientist doesn't mean you're running algorithms. To Alexis's point, you can run an algorithm, but you need to understand does it have goodness of fit? Is it a rigorous result? And also, results are not insights. Those are two different things. So A, is your model output good? Does it address your research question or your key insight, and does it provide value for the people and the audience that's necessary for it, and can you visualize that information? And the systems thinking around that is really important, because otherwise we get lost in the sea of data and we can run algorithm after algorithm with no real insight. Again, results are not insights necessarily, right? There's a difference. And one really big skill to Curtis's, talking points is that data scientists needs to be able to visualize results in a way that the end user can actually make use of them. And so that whole ecosystem is part of sort of scientific thinking. And I actually don't view writing an algorithm and running a script as science. I think it's not science. I think it's just tinkering with a line of code. To me, the scientific process, and I know I'm biased because I come from a research background, but to me, the scientific thinking is around the big picture and making sure you're connecting with people that it matters for, your key insights, and rigor around applying and testing algorithms. So that being said, I think that culture of data is important for data scientists that work in any environment. And then making insights and data tools accessible to people who are not at a data science level of expertise. When you're trying to produce data-driven products, for example, like an app or a game or a learning environment, building in data during production is really key. Data can't be an afterthought. Data can't be the thing that you think about after everything is shipped. And data also has to be QA'd and have data integrity. So all of that is important. So I'll end my long diatribe about systems thinking, but that's really key when you're in a production environment to make things accessible to people who are not data scientists, and as a data scientist have that larger systems thinking.
Yeah, and to add to that a little bit more, and I echo, what Elizabeth's saying, that what is data science, right? There's a whole debate there, and like the definition came very greatly from one company to another. But clearly for ML, it's all about data, right? Data is the new oil. You have company making money selling data. There's a new, data as a service term, in industry that's developing. And whether you're doing, fully supervised, semi-supervised, or even unsupervised, you need quality data, and you need a data mindset to be able to measure the system and the ROI and so forth, as we were discussing.
And thanks for that, Alexis. To that point, I mean, you're at Twitter, which is a huge organization, and how do you guys look at data transparency? Because for a lot of companies, our data and our teams are in silos. So sure, we might have a particular data set that is influencing what we're doing, but we might need another data set from another BU or another siloed environment. How do we get to that data and make those use cases more known, and to be able to demonstrate, our predictions and ideas around that?
Yeah, I mean, Twitter is an interesting company from that standpoint. Most of the data we're dealing with is essentially public, right, by definition, unlike most companies. So the data sets are accessible, widely within the company, except some of the metadata that's user specific, right? There's clearly a lot of rules and restriction around that. In most of the companies, you definitely have many more silos, and most companies struggle with doing kind of data lake or being able to federate data. And to have enough data to deal with. I think Twitter is kind of interesting because a lot of data is already there, right? And a lot of people wonder, oh, what AI is there, at Twitter? There's a lot, because at the end of the day, it's really a data company if you think about it. All we're producing is data and data services, and there are a lot of use cases around just health, keeping quality data on the platform, making sure you don't have like people gaming the system. There's a whole spectrum of like services related to that.
Awesome. So to that end, let's dive into security a little bit. So, I'm looking at standing up an ML practice, but who's responsible for the data? And I understand, guys, I mean, it depends on the size of the company, and there's a bunch of variables and factors, but try to key into this question here. Who's responsible for PII, for data security, obviously with new regards to laws like GDPR, CCPA, and here in California, but, what do I need to know in terms of using this data, and what's sensitive, what's not, what's accessible, what I should stay away from, when I should elicit a CISO or security team officer? What are your thoughts on that? Anybody have a thought?
Well, I think this brings up a lot of the challenges inherent in big data, right? I mean, we've all got more data than we can manage for the most part, and GDPR and some of those sorts of policies have sort of exposed a lot of the issues in the system, inherent in the system. And so now we've got clients asking us about, I want to keep 7 years of backups, and I want to be able to restore, back to some point 7 years ago, or I want to be able to delete, an individual's user record going back 7 years. So it's really created a lot of interesting problems that for honestly, for which no solutions existed prior. So, if you think about, if I've got a tape library sitting in a data center somewhere that's got 7 years of tape backups on it, how do you go back and remove, John Smith from that set of records for 7 years of? There's no, it's a massive problem that I think people are still trying to struggle with. And it's created a lot of interesting, probably opportunities for companies, as well as challenges that they're trying to wrestle with as well.
Well, how should and let's ask that question: how should they deal with their data and data environments today, and how do you see that progressing in the future? Is that something that we should, no one's going to turn a blind eye there, because someone's going to lose their job if it goes bad, right? So it's like, we have to get into that.
Well, GDPR and some of those things, a lot in some ways, like coronavirus, it's exposed a lot of the inherent flaws in the system, right? So we've got situations where not only do I have to go back and do those kinds of things, whereas with the coronavirus and all the economic ramifications of what's going on right now, it's brought to light things that weren't working before very well. So I think it's amazing to me, and somewhat fascinating to see how companies are pivoting so quickly, and they're trying so very hard, to turn on a dime. For example, I like to play Pokemon Go, which is by its nature a social game that involves us going out into the public. And within days of this all sort of happening, Niantic, the company that makes that game, had to make it sort of an experience that was playable, at the individual level. So it's affecting everything from the games that we play to, to the data that we keep.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. I play video games. Part of my work has been in learning games and personalized response of game environments to the user. And it's interesting because we're seeing a huge expansion of massive multiplayer online, games, and people signing on to that. And we're seeing parallel floods of usership and data coming from other similar environments. And so it'll be interesting to see how we do there. And I think one big thing that's coming up is it's a real trial by fire for people's data systems. You know, can you sustain this user load, and do you have your data in a format that is easily consumable by your product team, by the sort of systematized analytics and algorithms you have in place, so that it scales to this level of usage. And one thing when we talk about data integrity and we talk about format of data, I'll go back to the culture of data, where analysts need to have a say in the way that the data is structured and is able to be pulled out. I mean, there are several layers of engineering architecture. Curtis and Alexis, I'm sure you have deep expertise in that. But the data needs to come out of the system ready to use in whatever form it needs to be consumed. And that is a really key concern and element to consider when you're setting up a data system. Because if you can't, it doesn't matter how much data you collect, if you can't use it and you can't clean it, it doesn't matter, right? So this is the question that needs to be addressed at a large scale. This also brings in the hairy question that nobody wants to get at because it's expensive and retrofitting systems is a nightmare, but integrating of different data sources, which goes back to the need to have your data be usable, interpretable, and ready for consumption when it comes out of the system, because that easily leads to easier integration of data sources. But again, this is something that non-data nerds don't really like to hear about. When you go to your CEO and talk about the need for data integrity, the eyes glaze over, right? It's like, it's not very sexy to talk about. Nobody really wants to think about it, but it is 80% of the work.
Yeah, and I think security, I mean, similar to security, privacy is a table stake right now. It's a lot of work, right, for past systems if you have to reverse engineer, and also it's a lot of ongoing work, and it will always be there.
Yeah, and see, and thanks for that, guys, because that's kind of what I was hinting to with the question, which is, you know, we all know we need to use our data. We all know that most of us have a lot of data to utilize, but we don't necessarily know when, where, and how. And that's why, you know, you guys answering that question like that, I think helps to illuminate. I mean, listen to what you said just about having BAs have a little bit more, you know, having the analysts have a little bit more traction in helping set up the usage and the user story and connecting the dots between the business and obviously the IT and tech teams. Because if we can't leverage the data, we're going to be stuck in the same cesspool, forgive the expression, that we've been in, where we can't make that data actionable. We can't do the machine learning and the heavy lifting that we need to do, because the insights aren't going to do anything if we can't have the access that we need to pull from. And so, no, that's great. Let's pull into the future here a bit, to go to the next section, because I think you guys have a lot to say here. And so, you know, piggybacking on that last statement, how do you guys see ML evolving, you know, over the next few years? Are there any use cases or, you know, anything that's interesting that you like to share in terms of how this evolution might progress over the next few years amidst COVID?
I'll take a stab at that if you want, and probably start by the technical side, and I'm sure others can comment maybe more on the business side, because it's a little bit harder to predict there, or maybe it's not as much in my forte. I think from a tech side, there's been a tremendous progress in the last few years. When you look at things like transfer learning, data augmentation, you can actually do ML with less and less data. Semi-supervised techniques also minimize the amount of data. It's amazing actually how little data you can need, you know, for some of those problems. Even though we talk about data is still very important, but you need less and less. It means that ML is becoming more and more approachable. From a development standpoint, in addition to data, you have more and more, you know, things like auto ML, so more and more capabilities, you know, to build system, you know, almost automatically. So I think that the tech side is making it really pervasive, right? And it's just not just business data, but text and vision work really, really well these days. Again, a few years ago, you know, NLP was like so much more difficult than it is today. So I think it's really broadening up the number of applications you can have, right? With the fact that you need less data, it's easier to build, it works, you know, across, you know, any kind of data. it's really going to make it applicable to pretty much any industry and anything you can think of.
Got it. Do you think that there's some, are there new ways to ingest that data on more of a service-based level, maybe in more platform or AI as a service or ML as a service? You think, what I'm thinking in my mind is, let's go back, I don't know, 15 or so years, when in order to stand up a really well-designed, a really well built website, you're looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars, at scale. And again, I'm not talking about for the gigantic enterprises. I'm talking about for most American companies and companies around the world. Today that cost is tremendously going down. If you look at the single development build, right, those costs are driving downward. So my question to you and all of you really is, do you see that same thing happening in ML, where it's more service based, where you're really purchasing a service to ingest that data into your environment instead of having to build the whole infrastructure around it?
I mean, like a lot of the big companies like Google for Amazon or even Microsoft definitely have online ML, so you can definitely use pretty state-of-the-art technology, right, by kind of feeding your data and having model being trained and using online, right? Again, this is a build versus buy, right? Clearly it makes sense for many services. Fortunately, most of the underlying technology are open source, right? So you can decide also to use those technology and build your own. Again, if it makes sense, right?
Got it. So who's going to be disrupted in the midst of this? You guys, are there any thoughts that you have in terms of, are there industries that are going to be disrupted, or who's even poised for this disruption? And what are the thoughts there?
I read something that said that this is like every day is like a huge network test for phone companies and internet providers. Massive amounts of usage that they've never seen before, and it's like that probably every day. I would imagine that every day is like Black Friday for things like Zoom and GoToMeeting and those kinds of companies as well. They're probably really struggling with the demand and the usage of their systems and things of that nature. Whereas you've got other companies that are completely, trying to figure out a way, like Airbnb, like you mentioned, are trying to find ways to monetize, what they do. So it's a very interesting time that we live in, for sure.
Yeah. Anybody else want to stab that one? In terms of disruption, who's poised for it?
I'll just kind of dive in and say that I think almost every company that deals with distance learning or telecommunications or ways of connecting people across different contexts are going to feel this data burden. And they're going to be forced really to optimize their systems for this kind of scale. And going back to the previous points in the discussion, this means thinking in a larger perspective. What data do you need to collect? Who is it for? What are your algorithms? What are your goodness metrics? And how do you visualize that and utilize that, even if it's for product development, iteration of product development, as well as personalization of the tool itself to the user. And that, that includes educational systems, that includes games, that includes professional development, that includes teleconferencing software, that includes healthcare. So we're seeing a lot of virtual appointments now happening. People don't go into the doctor's office right now. It's gone to virtual because it's survival, right? When you set up these kind of systems to be able to use your data, again, it's having a data infrastructure and like a data labeling system really that allows your data to be interpretable and usable up front. And to Alexis's point, when we scale, we can be efficient with this in terms of using, these systems so if data is labeled efficiently and clearly and consistently across the system, first of all, different data sources can be integrated together in a much more easily consumable way. And then what you can do with that is you can scale that a lot more with feature engineering based on that data coming in. If you have clearly labeled and consistent data, it scales for feature engineering for analysis. And when we talk about these challenges, we have to talk about scale. I mean, that's what's happening. We are in a global economy. We are in a fully connected world at this point. I mean, just look at the analogy of the spread of the virus. It's worldwide. Everybody is connected, and we have to deal with that and really confront it. So I think it will be very positive in the end in terms of impact on optimizing systems and really thinking through data from a systems perspective. Yeah.
And to briefly add to that, I think COVID is really creating, an acceleration, right? We talk about education, but healthcare was mentioned also by Elizabeth. And I think we have scarcity, right? We have scarcity of people right now. And many, companies, for instance, benefit from having, good chatbot service. And chatbot is actually AI, right? It's kind of like one of the poster case, for like NLP. And so I think the companies, that have, adapted, AI and that are more AI capability have an edge right now.
Yeah, to your earlier point, Eli, it's amazing how many companies used to say that they wouldn't support people working from home who are now finding that it actually works okay for them. And, so, and like you said, like law and school and so many other organizations that would have never even considered that before now finding it to be, that it's actually working out okay for them and that they can do that.
It's a forcing function right now.
Literally forced innovation, right?
Yeah,
Right.
Right. Go ahead, Alexis.
No, I was going to say it's a forcing function. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know about you guys, but prior to COVID, if you had your phone out, you're at a restaurant, you're out in public, or, most of us walk with our heads down this way and, out in public. And I don't know about you, but in my communities, when I've gone to the grocery store and again, I'm social distancing or just kind of walk in my little neighborhood, no one's on their phones. No one. It's almost like this has forced us we crave connection.
Yeah.
And hey, I'm super, to break this a bit, I'm super thankful for these technologies, because guys, if this hit 20 years ago, where would we have been? We wouldn't have had the infrastructure, we wouldn't have the telecommunications or the VoIP services to be able to handle bandwidth at this high fidelity, high resolution type of experience. We're all connected all over the world instantaneously in the way that we are. Sure, we had some of the older systems, but I'm thankful that from any device, we can connect to our friends, to our family, to our networks, to our corporations, and do business somewhat as usual, but in terms of the connection and connectivity. Right. What do you think about that? Would you agree or disagree? Or?
Well, I was just sort of say, I think that maybe this is the impetus for all these state governments to finally get off all that COBOL code.
Come on, COBOL, man, mainframe, let's go. Hey, it runs banks, man. It runs a lot. All right, let's pivot here. Last couple questions. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. To your point, I just wanted to say, it literally, our technology allows us literally to make data-driven real-time decisions about, should we go to the store right now? Is it safe to walk outside without a mask? And these kinds of things. And I'm thankful too. I have seen people in my neighborhood that I never knew were there. I'm like, oh, you live here, hi. And it's funny, we're 6 feet away at least, wearing a mask across the street, and people are like, like people are dying to say hello.
Human, a real life human.
Yeah, and so it's a really interesting time. And I think leveraging that sense of connectivity and the opportunity to make data-driven decisions as well as human connection is really unprecedented.
Yeah, WALL-E, the movie WALL-E looks a little bit timely, and unfortunately, I hope we don't have the B&Ls of the world serving us through, anyway, that's another reference, but you guys get around that. I wanted to quickly pivot to a few more questions, so we have time for a Q&A session at the end. So let's just talk really briefly, tools, platforms, technologies that you would recommend. I mean, just maybe spout some of those off kind of popcorn style, or places people can go to learn more if they're kind of beginning their journey in ML. And whoever wants to take that, please jump in.
Oh, wow. So, I mean, I unlike the other panelists here, I probably didn't get a formal education in data science. I learned it on my own. And I would just say that for people that want to learn data science, and it's a growing field, right? I mean, there's a lot of, students getting into that discipline, which I think is great. And I think the tools will become a little bit more democratized, a little bit easier to use, which I think is also very helpful. I would just point out there's some great YouTube videos. I mean, there's great articles. I think the thing that I found to be challenging is it's not that difficult to learn, what a linear regression is or how it works or what, what's going on behind the scenes there. I think the trick is to understand how it integrates with everything else and how you need to present the data to that and the challenges around the data. So that's the tricky bit, I think, and that comes with a little bit of practice and a little bit of learning and trial and error and things of that nature. And having a mentor can be good. So I would suggest if you're trying to learn data science, to find somebody who does it, and who has been through those problems and can help you with some of those interesting challenges, because it's the gray areas between the tools that I think make data science tricky, and there's not a lot of great resources online to sort of answer those questions.
I think it's never been a better time to learn, right? You have online platform like Coursera and others. You have cloud-based platform that contain data, code with notebooks. So it's super easy to learn with like next to zero resources for free. You have a lot of open source frameworks, Apache Spark, TensorFlow, PyTorch. The scope of AI is large, right? So it's good to know what you want to specialize, whether it's analytics, data engineering, machine learning, deep learning, or even research. But I think it's good to also get an appreciation of data first and kind of like start, learning from there.
That's great.
And I should probably plug Vertica as well, because if you don't know Python or TensorFlow or all that stuff, you can actually do data science right with SQL in our product, and you can download the community edition for free and use it there. So that's how I do data science, is just with SQL commands, which is probably cheating in some ways, but it certainly gets the job done. So
that's great.
And I think, just to speak to personalized learning, there's a lot of platforms that do that. So you write code, and in real time, your code is evaluated, which is a nice tool. And I think that personalized application of data for adaptivity to the learner and the user is going to be growing quite a bit. And I could name a few. I'm not going to try to plug one or the other. Like, I think Codecademy, DataCamp are a couple that use that. And in the past, in terms of building my code base, that's been very, very helpful. And it's accessible to a lot of different levels of learners as well.
That's great. And I would add too, for those of you that are brand new to this, I wouldn't start at reading one of Hinson's research papers, because that will numb your mind. But maybe step into a Kaggle contest or something. Like go find places where you can join a community, to learn and everything that the panelists have said. But go find a community where you can be embedded at whatever level. You can start at whatever level and jump in and start helping and contributing and things like that. And I would follow some leaders in data science, like these folks on the panel and others. I would follow some on LinkedIn and ask questions or read their articles and try to get a baseline understanding of where your personal interests lie and how you would lay that on the education and learning that you want to proceed your career in growth in ML. All right, so let's open up. We got about 5 more minutes or so. I'm going to open to see if there are any questions that have come through. And let's see, so we can answer. Okay, so I've got a couple questions here, and I'm just going to give me a second to read them. All right, so one person asks, how does data science and ML change at the edge of the network? Model training becomes difficult. Oh, let's see, I lost my place. Let's see if I can expand this. Sorry, give me a second, guys. Apologize there. Model trainings become difficult if you lack network availability. You guys catch that question?
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody want to take that?
I can take a quick stab if you want at that. I mean, historically, machine learning will be done on the server side, but these days, like essentially the devices are so powerful, right? When you have like iOS device and Android device, the capabilities are pretty breathtaking, right? With GPU, and you can really do a lot on the device. So it used to be that a lot of the inference could be done on the device, not just on the back end, but now even some of the training can actually be done on the device. And Apple and Google led the way there with like differential privacy, with the ability to do essentially federated learning, the ability to have a model train on the on the cloud, but don't also be able to kind of fine tune that model on the device for privacy reasons. One of the poster, use case for that was like auto completion, right? You want your auto completion to be personalized to your data, and you don't want leaks across users. So I think the future, there's definitely going to be more and more, done on the edge. And you can also do, as always, hybrid, right? You can mix and match. So it's possible that you try to do some inferences a little bit degraded on the device if you have, if you don't have network connectivity, and then if you have network connectivity, then you can potentially still, make the inference and the call on the server side.
Awesome. Thank you for answering that question. Anybody want to take a stab at that, or I'm going to go to the next question? I'll just go to the. Oh,
Sure.
Yeah, go for it.
Well, I was just going to say I would be concerned about overfitting, right? If you're doing data science in a very siloed type environment, you want to make sure you're not overfitting stuff. And then the other thing to point out would be if you're doing something like anomaly detection and you don't have all the data available to you, you might not get very good results from your anomaly detection algorithms. So you want to make sure you've got the most data you possibly can have, so that you've got all the anomalies available to you for those kinds of predictions.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there are some things to watch out for, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. But typically, you still train the big model on the server, and then you have the ability to bring it down and fine tune.
Yeah, just in terms of a puzzle piece here, something that keeps coming up, and I wanted to mention it earlier, Alexis, when you were talking about paucity of data or sort of efficient data fueling models, that dimensionality reduction and feature reduction in an automated sense really lends to the scalability and use of a server-side or client-side analytics, which then goes back to how are you labeling and collecting data, and can you efficiently write code to scale across multiple data features for dimensionality reduction. So
the data science, labeling, acquisition, it's very, very important. I think this is why getting a broad perspective is important, because if you just focus on doing, deep learning and optimization of neural net, you may miss the point, right? Work on academic data and then not realize, complex or critical is the data, whether it's like, subsampling, whether it's like, augmenting, whether it's kind of like minimizing, the data you have to label by optimizing to our decision boundaries, and then rebalancing data over time. It's definitely a lot of work. And
some tweaking on the leadership side in terms of past leading of data teams. It's figuring out, okay, in a sense of scale, what algorithms am I applying, and do I need dimensionality reduction or feature reduction? For example, if you're running random forest, you really don't. If you're running a cart model, you do. And then what do you apply so that it's not going to skew the features that you collect? For example, lasso is great, but it's very sensitive to outliers. And so, just these kinds of questions where you have a strong data foundation, you identify your algorithms and the context, and then set these automated parameters accordingly. I mean, I think it's all part of the efficiency of the structure, but it does mean a well thought out piece of every step, and integration with the players in every step. The analysts need to be talking to the engineers who are talking to the tech side, and the devs who are implementing the APIs and all the things. So it's all interconnected, and it's not an easy thing, but once the infrastructure is built and these things are considered systematically, it does get easier.
Yeah, you make a great point there, Liz, that obviously, and that's what I was trying to harken to earlier with kind of the silos, not necessarily data silos, but they're silos of teams. And if we can unlock that, then we can probably get closer at building, and whether it's agile, scrum based or whatever, but at least we can get somewhere closer to utilization and helping each other get to that end. What about bias? We haven't really talked much about bias, and there's a few questions here in the chat around ensuring that we're not introducing bias into the algorithm use and creation, all those things. How do you guys address that?
Yeah, I can take a stab if you want. First of all, it's a really hard problem, right?
Yes.
It's a really hard problem because I've yet to see, like a comprehensive, definition of what is biased, right? You have obviously some of the usual suspects, but I think if you go across the board, what is biased, will already differ, right? from country to country. So it makes it very difficult, because now it's kind of like a localized, problem to a certain extent, right? But putting that aside, obviously, what you want to make sure that once you identify, what are some of the potential biases, and when you agree on that, you want to make sure that you have data to essentially train and validate and kind of manage and monitor or against that. And there's a lot more to it, of course.
Yeah, I agree. I think the data foundations come into play here, so that you can scale your insights across different contexts. So one of the things, as you mentioned, Alexis, is validity. So we need to think about geographical validity and external validity in terms of, do our insights scale across different populations? If I'm building a model and I am designing and personalizing based on that model, did I take a representative sampling of my user base in building the model, right? So just a brief note in terms of validity. I mean, that's a really important consideration.
Awesome. Okay, just a few more, and I want to address, we're at 11:03 here in terms of when we're recording this live. And so if you need to take off, feel free. We're going to just spend a few more minutes because there are several questions here in the chat that we wanted to make sure that we get those questions answered for you. So panelists, if it's okay, we're going to spend like 5 more minutes answering these.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so someone asked more pointed to the coronavirus. They said, assuming that corona started in Jan 2020, which we think, based on what we understand, it was early as in November of last year in Wuhan. So let's just say, 4 or 5 months that corona has been, out. So say we have 3 or 4 or 5 months of data. Is that still good to build a forecast model on with what we know about corona, for example?
I have a quick
you
comment.
have to work with
Oh,
what
sorry,
you've
go
got,
ahead.
right? Well, I mean, I think you've got to use what you've got, right? I mean, we can't go and create more data. So I think this gets back to an age-old question in data science of, do I continue to tweak this model, or should I go ahead and be done with it and use what I've got to make some decisions around? I mean, there's always time to improve models going forward, but it's the old should I fish or cut bait kind of issue. It's like, I could sit on this forever because I think as data scientists, we like to make things 100% perfect, but at some point, we need to just say, yeah, this is going to get us some insights that are going to be valuable today. Knowing that I might be able to get better insights tomorrow, that's okay. But at some point, we need to take action and deliver with what we've got to work with.
Yeah, I mean, I'll add to that, I mean, obviously you have to figure out what answer you're trying to come up with, right, and look at the data accordingly. But I think there's like essentially prediction you can make, but there's also just description and analytics, right? I think just using data to understand what's going on, like, is super important. And I think we've done some of that, but I don't even think necessarily there has been as much done there, right? Given that the data can be scattered or partial and so forth.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. Just basic visualization and descriptive statistics are helpful in this case. I think we can build on what we have. I would caution against trying to build definitive predictive models right now, because in every context, in every geographical context, we have to consider what are the spurious and confounding variables. For example, in California, we could look at the number of cases identified, and people look at that and say, oh, well, there's not much happening. Like, people in California are not really affected because look, the numbers are low. And then, oh no, the virus is really spreading badly because there's this huge spike in cases yesterday and or last weekend. And when in reality, what was happening is that more tests were released to the public, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like, what other variables are happening contextually that actually affects the data? And for that reason, I think we can tinker around with predictive models, but also we need to find a way to account for those important spurious or confounding variables that aren't as visible.
Totally.
I would just add, I think this sounds like a data scientist trying to do the job of an epidemiologist. Right? We should probably let the epidemiologists do this work instead of trying to do it for them, even though I think data scientists tend to think they can solve every problem sometimes.
That's awesome.
But I think the
Okay,
point here is that
right.
epidemiologists have these models. They've been doing this stuff for 100 years. You know, they kind of know what they're doing.
Yep. Okay, so here's another question off of COVID. What about the distributed compute model to train the edge using something like computational storage enabled devices?
I mean, we had the edge question earlier. I mean, I think the key points still remain, right? Make sure you're not overfitting your data. Make sure you've got all the data that you need if you're doing anomaly detection. You know, be wary of not having the right amounts of data and things of that nature. Does anybody else have anything to add on this? I'm not sure.
No.
I think we answered
Okay.
a similar question
Yep. Okay. Yeah, we
earlier.
kind of said the same question from a different slice. Okay. And I'm going to take one more question here. Let me just make sure. Wow, this is an interesting question. Yeah, I'm gonna sorry, pivot. I'm gonna ask this question because it's very interesting. Person says, how does the panel feel about crime reduction using AI, like the movie Minority Report? Here in Dallas, our chief said she would start using new technology to reduce crime. Thoughts there? And again, this might point to, you know, having cameras up, using computer vision for license plates in and out of the city or in and out of high traffic, low traffic areas, night times, all these different types of things, facial recognition systems. It goes on and on. What are your thoughts there, guys?
It's a can of worms.
I mean, kind of warm. Actually, I mean,
favor.
I live in LA, right? It's similar to Elizabeth, so crime, can be an issue there, right? So I have Ring, for instance, but like Ring, I don't think necessarily brought crime down so much, but actually now it's actually more measured and more known. So there's even like in the community, people are saying crime is going up. And the question is, crime is going up, or is more crime being, kind of acknowledged, reported and shared? So there's
Right.
kind of debate, right? So to a certain extent, give you some kind of like control. Debate remains to be seen how much it's really reducing it, because some of the kind of the criminal, they don't really care, being caught, and they will put hoodie on and this and that, right?
Right. I know in Phoenix and Tempe, where I live, the police actually came out and asked people to stop committing crimes. Because we're all quarantining, you know, and actually they did. They stopped committing some crimes. So maybe the answer is just for the police to just ask people to stop. Maybe that's the actual solution, is just say,
Well,
hey, cut it out.
yeah, now it's probably
What?
going
We should have been doing that for 100 years ago.
Human
Just stop it.
interaction? What?
Hey, what
They
was that?
just asked them to stop.
What was that Saturday Night Live? You guys remember the counselor back in the day, and everything that they said, the counselor was like, "Stop it, just stop it." You guys remember that? Yeah. So
Right.
maybe that's going to work. So just tell people to stop. Okay.
Well, now everybody's home, right? So like home burglaries are probably going down, right? But it's probably
Also,
yeah, I would imagine.
Do people want COVID? Like, hey, I'm gonna break into this house and take some stuff and also
Right.
get a free disease, like, is that gonna affect things as well? I think also, I mean, this is a big hairy question because it brings into consideration PII and privacy and how much we want to go down the rabbit hole of Big Brother.
Yeah.
China has a very different model for that, so it's a big question.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, guys. Well, with that,
Well,
I'm gonna.
from a data science
more?
perspective, sorry, it brings
Go ahead.
into lots of questions about what causes crime and how much data can you really bring into that picture in order to make those kinds of predictions. It could be really challenging.
Awesome. Well, hey guys, I want to just thank you, panelists, for being on here. We're at 11:10 now, 11:11 now, so I want to go ahead and conclude our time. Thanks everybody for being on the call today. I'm going to pass it back to Tech in Motion to close this out. Thanks for being here all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Elijah.
Thank you.
And thank you to all the panelists. Thank you to attendees for joining today's webinar. I hope you enjoyed the discussion and are leaving here with some valuable insight and knowledge moving forward. Thank you, Elijah, and the panelists, Curtis, Elizabeth, and Alexis, for being great subject matter experts. These guys did an amazing job pivoting from a live panel to a virtual webinar, so I wanted to say well done to them. You guys did a fantastic job. That being said, please join us for another virtual webinar tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern Time to discuss securing a remote workforce, where we'll interview 4 security experts to gather the latest cybersecurity insights and best practices in this unique climate and show you how to tackle new questions about the current state of the tech job market and how that impacts you. Don't hesitate to reach out. At Motion Recruitment, we're here to help in any way we can. After this call, we'll share the resources and recording with you. And I just want to say thank you again for joining, and stay safe out there.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Have a
Thank
good
you.
one.
Thank you.
Thanks.